Hey everybody, as we're coming back in, we had some technical difficulties. You'd think after all these years of Zoom, they wouldn't happen. But I think everyone is in now, and we are able to promote our panelists, who are the most important people tonight, because tonight's webinar is what admissions officers want from a college essay. And we are really lucky as a company to have such an incredible team of amazing admissions, specialists and professionals. But two of our team members, not only that, two of our team leaders, Kevin and Jordan here, are former admissions officers themselves. They've been in the room, and that's why we're here tonight, is because they want to share with you insights from in the room when they were in the room, commentary on what's been going on since they left the room, especially with what's going on with AI and trends and admissions prompts and that we're seeing these days. But most importantly, what are admissions officers looking for in the essays that stand out? And we want to highlight as part of that how we coach students in that. So we are about to dive into an awesome panel. In the meantime, I want to give a quick introduction on myself and the company, and then I'll let Jordan and Kevin take it from there as we launch into this. So my name is Eric Karlan. I'm one of the co-founders of Ivy Experience. We are a college prep company that specializes in everything. We are comprehensive. We do academic tutoring. We do SAT and ACT prep. Do counseling for underclassmen on activities and what extracurricular students should be pursuing and course selection and summer plans. But all of this builds up to the marquee for most families, right? Which is working with students and supporting them on the essays and applications themselves, which we do throughout junior year, the summer after junior year, and of course into the fall of senior year. And we are right at that precipice of summer where we're very excited to dive deep in with students on the essays. We started as a small company in the Philadelphia area. Word of mouth is an amazing power. We've now worked with students in more than 40 states in 20 countries, be accepted to more than 500 different universities worldwide. Um, Tonight's webinar, like all the webinars we host, is offered for free, and we will be recording this and it will be posted on YouTube. So be sure to like our YouTube page, follow it. Also, our Instagram. You can check out our website, ivyexperience.com, which has a ton of resources as well. And we really appreciate you all spreading the word, not just about tonight's presentation, but all of our resources and, of course, our services. So, Jordan and Kevin, I want you guys to each introduce yourselves as you kick off your answers here. And either one of you can start, but let's dive in. And my big first question is when you guys were in the room reading these application essays, what's going on? Because I think that's such a mystery to so many people, right? Like, how are these essays being read? Like, we hear it, right? All three of us, like, are they even being read? I'm like, yes, they are. But tell us not just how they're being read, but how they're being read really thoughtfully and what that process looks like. So either one of you can kick us off.
I can start. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Holmes. I am the Assistant Director of College Admissions at Ivy Experience. As I say to all my students, just a fancy way of saying I'm an essay coach working with students on their essays and applications. I was a former admission officer. Eric kind of buried the lead, or not buried the lead, but spoiled the surprise. But I worked at the University of Pennsylvania, which is my alma mater, as well as American University in Washington, D.C. And I was also at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. All three times I was an admission officer, having different additional responsibilities and roles beyond reading applications, traveling around the country, doing that whole song and dance, as I say. What is happening is that the admission officer is really trying to get to know your student or you as a human being, because ultimately they're trying to figure out what type of person they're going to be when they get to campus. And the essay is a really great place to do that because so many other things are covered in so many other parts of the application. Your academics are in your transcript, how you are as a community member are going to be in your letters of recommendation, your activities, talk about how you spend your time outside of class. So what's quote unquote left is you or your student. How are they in a specific situation? What type of roommate are they going to be on campus? What type of teammate and things like that. So thinking about how to represent your student and what's important to them is really important because admission officers do actually genuinely care about that. There have been times when students, at least from my experience, anecdotally, strictly speaking, where an essay really did help make the difference. Where I said, "Oh, right, I really like this essay. I really understand who the student is, and they're applying for this, and they have great recommendations, and they have good test scores, and." I feel like I can feel positive about bringing them to campus, and that they're going to use the resources on my campus, or they're going to be a really great rock star in this department that they're applying for. Do they actually get read? Yes. Are they read quickly? Also, yes. I think both are true at the same time, but you do need to showcase who you are quickly and concisely and clearly. We're always looking for, we former admission officers are looking for the really clear message as to who the student is and what's important to them. So any way a student can do that in the 650 words is only going to help them throughout the process.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Jordan. You give me very little to say, but I'll give a shot at it anyway. So my name is Kevin Trudel. I am a senior college admissions specialist here at Ivy Experience. Before coming to Ivy Experience, I've worked for the admissions offices of Grinnell College, which is my alma mater, liberal arts college out in the Midwest, and also UC Berkeley. Well, I mean, I guess we need to start before we even read the essays. Like one of the things I did at both places was make sure like the whole file was there, and there was sometimes some follow up on that because after you hit submit, right, there's other things that have to get to you in admissions office for your file to be complete. When I say your file, I mean your whole application. So things like your recommendations, your transcripts, etc. Once we have that, then we would begin to read. I think Jordan covered it pretty thoroughly that, hey, we're using this to kind of paint a complete picture of who you are as a person because, or as a potential applicant, I should say, because we have some of the more formal aspects through transcripts, test scores, activity lists, etc. Now, how they're perceived does kind of depend on a few factors, right? Institutional priorities about how much weight the essay is given, what we're looking for, because, for example, when I was doing graduate admissions at UC Berkeley, what I'd be looking for is different than in an undergraduate admission situation, and things like that. But yeah, I mean, every essay is going to be read. I know that some parents sometimes we talk to on this side of the table, working with students, are concerned about whether, is my student going to be read thoroughly? Are they going to get a full shot at this? And the short answer is yes. I mean, when we're reading this as admissions officer, we try to gain as much insight as we can, even if it is a limited amount of time to a potential student. So, yeah, I mean, that's my answer.
And they're amazing answers. I'm curious, both of you highlighted the limited time there is to read these essays. And um which is an obvious limitation when you have a university, many universities that are receiving more than 100,000 applications per year with not just the Common App personal statement, which we're going to highlight momentarily, and school-specific supplement essays, which we'll also explain momentarily. Um, it, I don't want to ask quite yet because I know we're going to get there and it's a hard, impossible question to answer. But like, how do you stand out knowing that an admissions officer only has a minute or two to read it? And not just an admissions officer, but probably two admissions officers or a committee reading the essay. Um, but I'm curious how you guys, are trained and to read that quickly and that thoughtfully and what the messages of hey, here's what we're looking for, and what really jumps out to you that you're trained to see jump out to you, if that makes sense. Because you guys both touch on a key point. I mean, you can read quickly as well as very thoughtfully as well, and I'm wondering what that conversation looks like behind the scenes.
When I think about reading quickly and thoughtfully. I go back to the rating systems that each university will and admission office will end up having. And that will vary vastly across the spectrum, right? The three schools I worked at read very differently and and considered very different things, even though it's all the same materials, right? Still the Common App, it's still the essays, still the SATs, things like that. But they're using them in different ways that then ended up being different ways for different institutions. For an example, when I was at Penn a long time ago, I'm not sure if they still read this way now, but worth saying, there were a couple different ratings that multiple parts of the application could then filter into. And the personal statement, for example, could filter into multiple places. If a student ended up talking about how they made an impact in something that they really cared about, then that would go to one rating. If they talked about an academic curiosity that they like went down the rabbit hole with, then that could go with another way. If they then exemplified, elements of Penn that we really wanted to highlight, interdisciplinary studies, academic curiosity, have being a strong community member, or whatever it might be, that would go to a third rating. So all of these different ratings help orient admission officers around how to read the application. Do I think you should then try to orient your essay to those ratings that you don't know? No. And I think we'll talk about the like how do you stand out a little bit later, but I think that helped me, at least when I was in admission, think about how to orient myself.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. A point I do want to echo is that a lot of this, as Jordan indicated, does depend on the institution. How essays were read in my time at Grinnell versus UC Berkeley was different because there were different institutional priorities, and they're very different institutions, right? One is a lot bigger. And at Grinnell, the idea of fit mattered a lot because it's an academically rigorous, was a lot of work institution that's small and rural Iowa, right? And so fit does matter. And I part of that led to, more eyeballs would see a typical essay, more time would be spent on a typical essay because, it's harder to determine sort of that fit, whether you're going to revel in the intellectual community, the intellectual opportunities or community there, from just looking at an SAT score, right? So yeah, that's a part of it. And as far as what fit is, it doesn't have to be one thing. I think sometimes working with students, they assume there's like a magic bullet solution to the perfect essay, but there's two problems. One is that like there's a bunch of different institutions with different priorities, and two, all those institutions aren't just looking for one thing, right? There's a lot of ways to make yourself a good fit for an institution, right? And that was so, it could be someone who, as I said, is going to revel in intellectual opportunity and is very intellectually engaged. It could be someone who's going to be a community builder. There's no right or wrong way here. I mean, at UC Berkeley, I was reading things a bit faster, but it was with a more specific purpose, because it was graduate, personal statements, a statement of purpose, right? Where, there's kind of an element of cover letter involved there, and whether you can, because it was a technical program, can you complete the technical components, right? If your resume didn't speak to it, well, there's some qualitative aspects in your statement of purpose that spoke to that, which, obviously our audience is a little different here with underclassmen and high schoolers, but sometimes supplemental essays, there's more specific things being looked for in that way, when those are being read. So that's kind of what's translatable there. So I mean, we can build upon this as we go, obviously, but I mean, unfortunately, there's no one right answer, but there's a lot of ways to get authenticity and to really hit things that will shine in this process.
Well, you guys again here spoke in parallel with institutional priorities. And, I thought about this idea of how, when we are working with when we give a lot of these webinars and we're working with students, we talk all the time about this idea of like, there's many factors in admissions decisions that are out of your control. There's only so many that are in your control, right? Institutional priorities are not only out of your control, they're invisible when you're a student or applicant. And, so it's almost as even if you wanted to write to a rubric, it's like this invisible rubric, right? Which then goes to, okay, well, we don't have that invisible rubric of institutional priorities. Fine. Then you consider the fact, like, what's an admissions officer? And that's a running joke that all of us say, right? What's an admissions officer? And, the most common answer we get in public forums is someone raises their hand and they say, oh, an admissions officer is a gatekeeper, right? There's literally a book called Gatekeepers. And we push back and we say, no, no, no. Admissions officers are people. People accept other people, right? And you are evidence of that, Kevin and Jordan, right? Like you're here tonight. You are people, in the flesh, right? And it's an important point, right? That, and not only are you people, but you're recruiters, right? You're looking to get excited about the next class of students. You're opening each essay and application file looking to get excited. But before we get to that idea of like what's going to excite you, going back to that point of your humanness, I think there are some questions about what's happened since you guys left the admissions office rooms with AI, right? How admissions offices are using AI, and for tonight's purposes, specifically with regard to essays. Um, and on the flip side, your thoughts on, what you've seen with students, because let's be real, students have tried to use AI. And I think the three of us can agree, you know, the disappointment is mostly on the students' end, and there's no surprise on our end. But can you guys both speak about AI's role? Because I think before we dive into what makes a standout essay, we need to quickly address that point.
I mean, there's two ends of this, right? Like how students are using AI and how universities are and may use AI. Um, I mean, I think the simpler part is the student, how students use it. So obviously, language models, have become very popular the past few years. They've gotten steadily better. Um, but a challenge with language models is to write anything distinct. I'm sure, many times that if you've used ChatGPT, if you've used Claude, Gemini, any of these chatbots, you put something in, and if you're looking for kind of an insightful summary of something, or just a summary of something, or a paragraph response, it's okay. But the second it gets longer, it sort of starts to feel like gobbledygook. And I will say, in the cases, we don't love it, but we do occasionally see AI writing. That's the case. And the problem this presents for students is the purpose of the Common App personal statement specifically is, as Jordan indicated, for an admissions officer to be able to kind of get to know you a little bit, to understand who you'll be as a community member. And so if it doesn't feel like distinctly you, right, authentically you, then that essay is doing you a disservice. Like the ChatGPT essays we've seen, even when, and I had a parent send me one too, there's, even though there's a level of pizzazz, sometimes, they prompted enough to add pizzazz to it. I didn't learn anything about the student, right? In that, it wasn't particularly insightful. So, I mean, that's the thing. There's no way for an AI chatbot. You'd have to spend more time prompting an AI chatbot to become an expert on you than actually just writing your essay. I mean, to be blunt. So, for this genre of writing, it's a disservice for students because it's not like a basic summary of writing information. So we don't recommend it for that reason. I got a master's degree in a STEM field. I'm not all about just like don't use the tech, but in this case, it doesn't help you. I mean, on the admissions side, it's tough because even in my time at admissions, right? Like you kind of saw a transition more to committee-based evaluations, right? In shorter reading times and fewer people seeing it. And that was in what that is, I guess, for context, is decades ago, multiple decades ago, typically you'd have someone read a full file, right? That full admissions file, be very deliberate about it. Oftentimes a second person would read it, see if they came out with a similar assessment, different assessment, et cetera. And so, that might be 30 minutes of time. And, but when you have too many applications for an admissions officer to spend 30 minutes or for 30 minutes of time or more, if they go to committee, right, to be evaluated, you have to find a way to work quicker if you have 100,000 applications. So, a lot of universities went to a model where somebody's looking at what I would characterize simply as more quantitative factors, grades, scores, basic stuff, stuff like that. And one reader's looking at more the qualitative factors, the essays, the recommendations, etc. Right, and that can by kind of dividing labor and then talking to each other to see if there's any sort of cross insight that you can derive. You can get to a decision and understanding of a student quicker. I think AI is probably just a natural extension of that, where universities are trying to look for a way to process even more applications, because yes, you can hire more full-time people, you can hire seasonal readers, but there is ultimately a breaking point. And ultimately, though, I don't think we need to be too concerned, because it's one of those things that AI, at the level of a basic reading, or like if someone's only looking at something really quickly, it's more to filter out issues, right? So those AI bots will probably be used to just do like AI detection. Is this just like a ChatGPT essay that doesn't say anything, right? Or is this maybe an essay that's completely mailed in because it's like 5 words long and there's a 500-word prompt, right? And it will probably only be used for that. To the degree that, what I will say is that if you put work into it, right, and if you're actually in consideration, your essay will be read by an actual person, even years down the line. I expect that to be the case. I don't know if Jordan feels differently, because part of this is what is it in the past few years and intuiting into the future.
Yeah, I will add one thing firstly to the students using AI, in that it is the hill I will die on, that it really doesn't add anything to your application, right? I think it also comes from a place of, I'm not enough, that my words aren't enough, I'm not a good enough writer, so I have to use something else to get me to a point where my words are just, as you said, have pizzazz and the essay says something and like is snappy, right? But we've seen a lot of colleges very publicly move away from rating the actual essay, so that they're not looking at the quality of the writing. In fact, in the University of California system, it is illegal to do that in their system. But more so, they're looking for the quality of the person behind the writing. They're looking for what the student is actually trying to say in the essay, and way less about the level of vocabulary and all that. Practically speaking, also because a lot of these universities have writing courses that you're going to have to take to graduate anyway. That happened in my undergrad. That happened at every other school that I was at. You had to take some sort of course to learn how to write. So they're going to teach you by the time you leave. So they don't really care where you're coming in from. They mostly care about the type of person you are and type of learner and community member, things like that. So that's my thing about students. With colleges, I feel like it is kind of like a more as things change, the more they stay the same. That like, yes, things are becoming more efficient. Yes, AI readers are becoming a part of the landscape on the admission office side. Some schools have been very upfront about that. Virginia Tech, for example, is saying that one of their readers this year, they have a 2-reader system. One of the readers will be AI, the other one will be a human. If these two agree, they move on. If they disagree, it goes to a third human reader to make the tie-breaking decision on what to do with the file. That is kind of, that system has been in place for a while, right? The 2-reader system and then somebody else. So it was always like you had to be agreeing with somebody. And then also in a couple of schools, or at least one school that I worked at, there was a very hard and fast predictive model that they use through not AI, but through codes and through predictive data that kind of looks like AI right now. AI just does it more quickly and models it differently, but it was still thinking about the same factors that will ultimately go into a student's decision later on, which again talks about institution priorities, but that's another can of worms. But at the same time, if they're now moving to AI to do that, they were already doing some sort of predictive modeling behind the scenes, which is very common in a lot of institutions. So yes, I think the like label and the box is jarring to some people that AI is in admission offices, but previously there have been some sort of prediction modeling, something that's been going on in the back end for at least a few years now.
Okay, so let's get to the big question, right? Especially we'll start from the Common App essay and then talk about supplements, right? Because we've just addressed a lot of points. Number one, that you guys as admissions officers are processing stuff quickly. Number two, as you just acknowledged, and while it's literally illegal, according to in California through the state system, to judge an essay based on the quality of writing. And by the way, that includes spelling and grammar. You can misspell half the words in the essay. They cannot deduct um, any quote unquote points on a rubric for that, right? They can't judge the essay according to that. So it's being read quickly. It's not based on how well written it is, right? So for all the parents who call us and they go, we don't know if we need your service, we're good writers or my kid's a great writer. And we're like, well, guess what, right? Like that's wonderful. Um, but it's not a writing contest. It's a personal vulnerability and insight contest, which I know I'm spoiling a little bit here, but that is our answer. So you have those components, you have institutional priorities. Interestingly, I was just, Kevin was drawing the distinction between graduate and undergraduate essays. Graduate school application essays are more like supplements, straightforward, academic in many cases. I was just on with a student right before this who like handed this to me on a silver platter. He's like, oh, my personal statement. He has a great idea. And he's like, I don't think it's a good idea. I need to be more serious and academic. I'm like, no, 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 that's not it. So to both of you guys, what makes a standout essay? What are the ingredients of a truly standout essay? And let's start with that personal statement. And, you know, when we talk about personal statement, we're also mean the Common App essay. It's that main 650 word essay. So that's about 1 page, single spaced. This is the essay that goes to every school. The prompts are very open-ended to the point where the last prompt option is topic of your choice, right? So even that, it's like, well, what do they want from me? Guys, what do they want?
And it sounds so trite, and I acknowledge it every single time I say it to students, but we admission officers really are just looking for you as a human being. What does that mean? We're looking for your personal insights, your story, your distinct perspective on the world. Notice I said distinct and not unique. This is the point that I make with all of my students. Whenever they say the word unique, it's like, that's not what we're doing here. Because you don't have to be the underwater basket weaving champion in South America in order to get into college. You just have to have a distinct perspective about how you see the world, what's important to you, things like that. So again, this stems from, or like a lot of students think that you need to be unique and write about something that no one's written about before, because again, they feel like their story isn't unique enough and that like it's boring. But I said this as an admission officer, I will say it until I'm no longer in this career. You or your family have heard your story or your student's story for the past 16, 17, 18 years. So to you, it's boring. But to the admission officer, it's the first time they're hearing about it. And they want to get to know you. So the thing that you're just like living with and you understand, and that's your perspective, and it's just kind of like in the background, that ends up typically being the thing that is the most interesting because it shows exactly who you are and exactly what's important to you and why you are doing the thing that you do, why you see the things that you do. So again, they're looking for you. They're looking for the perspectives that you have and the way that you see the world in often the smallest things that end up being the most interesting and most impactful ways to spin out a story or spin out a perspective.
That makes a lot of sense, Jordan. I can maybe help illustrate a little bit distinct as well. Some of my favorite like essays, the ones that I remember years and years later, the feeling they give me after I read them is like if I had like a 30-minute conversation with somebody and I just kind of felt like I got to know them better as a person, right? And so that Jordan's point, that doesn't have to be their most excessive accomplishment that they've ever done or anything like that, right? But I felt I've gotten to know them in some way. So if you're an Olympic basket weaving champion, that's impressive, but I don't know much about you. You're right. Maybe there might be something about that journey that might be interesting, but the championship itself is not interesting. So, I mean, I'm thinking about a student who wrote about kind of a shared holiday that they and their neighbors made together. They celebrate every year, and there's peculiarities to it. I can't speak English today. That really offer insight into how they view the world and how their family views the world. So things like that, right? Where I felt like I've gotten to know the student, even though I haven't, right? I've just spent maybe 3 to 5 minutes reading an essay, right? But now, I I have a vision in my mind of who they are. And that's kind of cool when you walk away with that feeling. So working with students, we try to create it, we try to get to know them and try to figure out who they are as people so we can offer a window into that into that like 3 to 5 minute snippet that will help a reader really gain insight into who they are as a person.
I think that's such a big part of our job is reassuring students that their stories are not only enough, but that, in most cases, they're exceptional, right? Like when you really find, I love your distinction between a distinguishing essay and a unique essay, Jordan. Um, because I think, one thing we always preach is that every student has stories, plural, to share. And it's just getting in touch with them, which I think is distinct. I don't necessarily need you guys to elaborate on these points, but I am curious, like you did just say eloquently what are the ingredients of a great essay. What are the most common pitfalls you guys see in bad essays where like students and parents think like they've nailed it and you're like, wow, you missed this completely.
I I feel like a lot of students feel like they need to talk about their academics in their essay, in their personal statement. And a part of our job is to think about your essay or your application as a whole, right? Think about everything else. And again, at the beginning, there are so many other places that all these other pieces are going to be. So your academics don't need to go in your personal statement. I think again, if it doesn't do what Kevin said and that it doesn't teach anything about who you are and I don't learn anything else about you, that's doing a disservice to yourself and kind of miss an opportunity. Um, I think it also there's a lot of chatter online and has been for the entire time I've been in this industry about like writing the sob story or writing the sympathy thing or playing some sort of card that you feel like you have to play in a way that doesn't necessarily again teach you anything more about the student. So you don't have to write tragedy, you don't have to write about anything catastrophic that's happened. And I've had students open the conversation about their personal things, personal statement saying, well, I've had nothing bad happen to me, so what do I even write about? And I said, you have so many things to write about because you don't have to just write about this thing, right? And again, admission officers are people. If I read 30 applications a day and 28 of them have sob stories, that's going to be a tough day for me, right? Then I don't want to have to do that. So write about what's important to you. And if you do have something that has happened that's catastrophic, then let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about how we can integrate that if necessary. But I think those for me are the big pitfalls I end up seeing.
Yeah, no, I largely agree with that. I mean, I think if you think about it, right, if you go online to try to find a formula for this, that formula, because it's a formula someone else came up with, inherently is not going to accurately describe and present you, right? So trying to find a magic formula, whether that's the tale of woe or academic accomplishment or et cetera, is not necessarily the way to approach this. I guess the other thing I would say besides that is that approach also boxes you in, right? So, if you only think of like the bad things that have happened to you, like maybe there are some really awesome things that have happened to you that really speak to how you engage with community. Now you're not even thinking about them, right? So I don't necessarily think there's bad topics. There's cliche ways of talking about them. And that's where all the pitfalls exist. And admittedly, it's difficult. The part I really do empathize with students, teachers, parents, because like it's hard to find out like what admissions officers have read 10,000 times if you just don't know. But one thing you can do, one thing we help our students in this process do is make sure that they actually ask introspective questions and get sort of we get to know each other so that they can come across authentically and present a better window into who they are.
Well, that was going to be my next question too. Although I think I want to get to this back to the sob story thing in a second, right? Because it's like we're saying all these things that you shouldn't do, right? I could add on to that, right? Don't write essays about other people. Don't write essays even about a significant achievement, right? It's like the big risk is that you end up writing about the thing rather than about yourself. Also, don't write too generically, right? Where it's some like philosophy and mantra, but it's not grounded in any detail, right? And then, you always hear the tropes of like, don't write a mission trip essay, don't write a community service essay, don't write a grandparent essay, don't write a dance essay. And it's like by the time we're done, it's like, how do you find the topics? So that's what I was going to flip at both of you. And, you know, I know that some of this maybe feel personal, some of it's going to feel more institutional for how we do it as a group and a company. How do you guys find the right topics for these essays? Like, what are the keys to that?
I mean, the short answer is, getting to know a student, because if in that process they can't really care about something, they're going to have a lot to say about it, right? They're going to typically have experiences to draw upon to speak about it. And that's where oftentimes a great topic is. Now, obviously, like there's no, that doesn't work that way, that cleanly, typically in most cases. But the point is that in asking the right questions, you can begin to sort of dig upon things that are important to a person, right? Um, like I got off a call with a student, earlier today, where like I'm pretty sure if I asked them to write a PhD thesis about like short passing soccer tactics, they could do it. Right. So, there's not really a shortcut to finding the topic, but I think asking the right questions and getting to know students offers an avenue into getting to that topic.
Yeah, I think that idea, and I know people may be listening to that, Kevin, and going like, well, what are the right questions? And then we can ask them. But, I think, what I'm hearing and what I've felt too is that the right questions are the ones, and you just kept saying this over and over again, is like, you really just get to know people more deeply and like get to see things through their eyes, through their perspective. And that takes time. People ask us why we start meeting with students in, as early. And again, if you're calling us now, or you have friends that you're referring to, and now being mid-May, right? It's still not late to be starting this process with us in the coming weeks. But then people are like, well, what did you do early on? It's like we're building that relationship with students, and it takes time. And the more time we have, we cherish that. Um, it's invaluable. Jordan, what would you add or say on top of that?
I similar idea in that I sometimes preface it to students or pitch it to students and say, what do your friends tell you to shut up talking about? What are the things that you can't stop thinking about, Googling, watching YouTube videos about, TikTok, whatever you're doing? And those are good places to start. Are you going to talk explicitly about the thing, capital T? Probably not. But maybe that ends up being a vehicle that gets to a way to think about you and how you interact with the world and what's important to you. Do you like motorcycles so much to the point where you're fixing them up, you're finding them on the street, you're like jumping to the hard thing first and you're doing all of that immediately? Great. You don't just like motorcycles. You're going to this other way more specific viewpoint, and it's very counterintuitive that you would think that like the broader a topic, the more you have to talk about it. But we have found, and I have found, that the more specific you get within a topic, the more precise you can be in saying, hey, I actually do this in multiple ways throughout my life. And that then helps students hone in on the things that are specific to them. So they're not just talking about, I like motorcycles and music, and I listen to them together. It says, no, I listen to the car, or like I listen to the carburetors to then figure out how to do this. And me listening to this helps me do X, Y, and Z. So it's about getting specific and thinking really deeply about the individual things that you or your student really enjoys, to then pull that thread and see where it goes throughout the rest of your life and start to make those connections.
Kevin said something profound, and like I heard it, and now I'm thinking about it as we're still talking. And he said he has some empathy for all the students and parents out there who don't recognize, the clichéness of some of the ideas or like why some ideas don't work. And I was thinking, as I dwelled on that more, Kevin, I thought about something that I've found myself saying. I like telling the story of, you know, a student who probably wins the record for the number of months. I did say months, not days or weeks. It took to find their personal statement topic. And we finally did make a breakthrough. The long story short is that they were really struggling. They kept coming back to this thing, and in a moment of uncharacteristic weakness on my point, but just also desperation to get them to just write and just jog their brain a little, I was like, okay, write about this topic. And it was about how they built their own computer, which again, right? Like we know that's super impressive, guys. It's the thing with a capital T. And sure enough, the entire essay was about the thing and not them as a person. But in the last line of this first draft, that was very ineffective to say it at best, was, and that's why 3 years later, I still wash my hands every single time before I used the computer. And I called the student and I was so excited. And I was like, this is it. That's the essay. And we had this incredibly emotional, deep conversation about how they didn't use to take pride in their work and have those standards of excellence. And, you know, and this was a breakthrough and it really reshaped how they approached everything in their life. And I share that anecdote going back to Kevin's point, which is like if you stuck that student and their family in a room, it's like the old if you stick a monkey in a typewriter in a room, like eventually they're gonna write Shakespeare. You know, I don't think that's the case, Kevin, right? Like you can put a student and a parent in a room and they may never see that as the topic. And I do think that comes with a lot of our experience and expertise. I have a follow-up point here that I want to throw at you guys, but I'm wondering if either of you guys have any thoughts. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but like, any thoughts on that idea that like sometimes you need an outside perspective to like see the thing that is distinguishing. Any thoughts on that point? Because it just felt powerful when you said it, Kevin.
Well, the way I look at it like this, a common, and I'm sure we all can relate to this, having worked with a lot of students, a common topic that'll oftentimes come up as we're getting to know students, and maybe we'll oftentimes ask them, like, what do you think as potential ideas? Is maybe they've had like a major injury, right? Or a health issue. Now, sometimes a part of that journey can be insightful, right? But if, as you ask about it, right, if all they have to say about it is like, well, I had to learn perseverance, that is a theme about that topic that, we've seen a lot, because you're being lumped together, not with everybody who broke that specific bone in their leg, but anybody who's ever had an injury or an illness, right? And which is a much larger group. It's a much more generalized group if we're thinking about them as people. But when this is where the empathy comes in, because I'm sure like when you were going through it, you're rehabbing and relearning how to walk. It was the biggest thing in your life for 2 years, right? Or a year, right? And that's what can be, I think, a little bit challenging and frustrating, because, is that like, and that's not diminishing, like that did take a lot of perseverance, and that's awesome. Like you are a better person for that. Like, so I want to make sure that if just a parent or a child watching this webinar, that they've gone through that and they think it's awesome. I see, right? But as we indicated earlier, when we're talking what makes a good personal statement, it's distinct, right? And if we're thinking about you in this generalized group of people who've had an illness or a sports injury, that's not distinct to you, right? So I think that's where, it's kind of an example of like where the pitfalls come. And so this is why asking the right questions, asking follow-up questions, maybe about that injury, because it's not that there's nothing valuable that you learned in that injury or nothing distinct, right? Because, maybe it's that, it's important to show up every day, right? You showed up every day for rehab, and that's something that you do in your life now, right? Like you check in like with your group of friends every single day. You send each one of them a text. It's a thing you do every day, right? Like you have your planner, you make sure you show up every day, you get everything done in that planner, and make sure your academics are on track, right? So maybe that theme of showing up every day is something that pops up in multiple parts of your life, and it's a little bit more distinct than just I had an illness or injury and I learned perseverance. So I think that's where I think people often get caught up, because it was very important to them, but the way they're presenting it, or the only theme that is behind that experience is something that is very cliche and more generalized to a larger group, even if it is very important to them.
Well, and I think that it's funny that you went back to an example like an injury, because I think that there's confusion out there right now. It's like you hear all this, what we're saying, what we're talking about, and yet if we're talking about current events, one of the most recent essays that went viral was about a girl who lost her mother, right? And people are going like, well, there's the proof, right? Like, and she got into all these top schools. Like, we need something terrible to happen to us. Um, you know, but really the essay was she framed it in through the letter S, right? Saying that, when I lost my mother, I lost the letter S. Things that were plural became singular. And the whole essay is, about restoring the letter S in her life and recapturing that, which speaks to, you know, what I always say is my favorite type of essay is one that changes how I see the world. And it's something where when I'm talking to students, I go, there's hundreds and thousands of applicants every year who've lost a parent or a sibling. Why don't they all go viral? Why did this one go viral? And I think that that's such a poignant, perspective to maintain is right. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's not what you write about or the topic, it's how you frame it through your perspective. Um, I gave my answer on what my favorite type of essay is. I know we discussed ending with this question, but I think, well, I'd love to ask this to you guys now, and then we can briefly touch on supplementals and then answer any Q&As that anyone has. By the way, if you're here, answer any questions in the chat. We're happy to answer them. But Jordan and Kevin, like, we're talking about all this, I'd like to ask you not just what makes an essay stand out, but like what are your favorite types of essays, right? If mine are the ones that change how I see the world, whether it's the letter S changing how I see grieving, or the girl who wrote about microwaving her waffles for 66 seconds and now I can never input the numbers on the microwave the same way. What about for you guys? You want to start, Jordan?
Yeah. My favorite kinds of essays are the ones that answer the question of so what? You went to the place, you did the thing, you think this way, so what? What does that do for you? How does that help you in your life? How can I try to get a window into who you are through this topic? Because it's not enough just to say, here's the thing with a capital T. We need some more, we admission officers, also us as coaches, need you to engage with that a little bit more. This is a different kind of essay that you've written throughout your entire high school career, and we acknowledge that. And as Kevin said, like there's a lot of empathy going into that. It's like we acknowledge like this is weird, and we know that. But a big part of why I think essays end up being really strong is they answer the question of so what. Again, you have this way of seeing the world. What does that do for you? How do you use it? Where else does it show up in your life?
I have to say before Kevin goes, Jordan, and not to diminish any of our other team members, perspectives on what their favorite type of essay is, but you have permanently gotten lodged in my head with that question. It's so effective because I think it's such a jarring question at face value. Jordan, I say this with love, but like it sounds really snarky. To ask that, but it's actually packed with compassion and depth, and it really, I think, forces students and parents, and guardians to really pause for a minute and be like, well, we talk and think about this thing all the time. So what? You know, it's, I think it's a beautiful moment for students to really reflect and be like, yeah, you know what? Why does this matter? What does this say about me? What is this showcasing and celebrating about me? And I will confess personally on this webinar that I ask "so what" a lot now, and I very have to quickly every time be like, no, I say this with love, no snark. I get how I sound right now, but it's an effective question. Kevin, what about you? What's your favorite tip?
Well, no, I will say I will co-sign. I agree. It is an effective technique to help students think about things in a different way. But I think we spoke about this a little bit earlier, where for me, the essays that I love the most that stick with me are the ones where after reading them, I felt like I sat with you in a coffee shop for an hour and was just talking to you. When I think about like all my favorite essays, like that thread ties them all. So, it's why something that's distinctly you is so important.
Which isn't that what people say about interviews, right? It's like the best interviews are the ones that just feel like a conversation. I think we're like circling over and over again about the humanity in all of this. Um, I know we're coming up to an hour, and I know that's when a lot of people jump off. I want to acknowledge we're talking about all these essays, especially the personal statement. But can you guys touch for a couple minutes about when people talk about supplement essays? What are they, and how are they similar from that main Common App essay, which is more of a personal narrative, and how are they different? Maybe Jordan, you can kick us off on this one.
Yeah. So personal, or rather, the personal statement goes to every single school you apply to. These supplemental essays go only to the schools that are asking those specific prompts. When you go into the Common App, you add schools to the Common Application, you fill out their questions on their portion of the Common App, including some additional supplemental essays, depending on the school. These tend to be a lot more direct. They're also typically a lot shorter, whereas the personal statement is kind of amorphous. The supplemental essay is a little bit more, or it tend to be, again, more directive. Why do you want to go here? Why do you want to study what you want to study here? What's a community that you really care about? Things like that. And because of that, there are going to be lots of overlaps among different colleges and questions. So even if you're writing an essay for one school, you can repurpose parts of them very smartly. Don't just copy and paste. It's very easy to tell. Um, you can repurpose smartly into that next school that's asking a similar or the same question. So what's similar between the Common App and the supplements is that you still need to be distinct. You still need to be authentic to who you are and what's important to you, but just with a much more directive prompt. Don't just say, I want to study X because Y. Give us the personal reasons, right? The thing that I keep on talking about with my essay coach partner is that sincerity is in these days. Be really sincere, be really authentic about why you care about this. If you want to nerd out about why you love differential equations, do that. If you're applying for a math major and they're asking why you want to study math, it's a perfect place to do it, right? So being really direct and authentic and sincere and specific in those supplemental essays, just as you were in your personal statement, I think ends up being the best piece of advice there.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add is that for supplemental essays, those essays that go to a specific school that's requesting it, you're being that prompt is usually being thrown at you for a reason. That's where kind of institutional priority comes in. So if they are asking you for like a why do you want to study this thing or why do you want to study here, they're trying to maybe suss out academic fit for this that institution. Honors colleges, for example, will maybe they're kind of gauging like, do you think from an interdisciplinary perspective. I think University of Florida had an interesting prompt for their honors college where they asked about kind of like AI is being implemented everywhere. If you're at the honors college, like how will you take what you learn here to kind of deal with this new reality? As far as it doesn't have to just be engineering, right? It could be regulation, it could be implementation in different fields, right? So That's the only thing there is that the prompt for the supplemental essay, I know Jordan mentioned it, but I want to underline it, right? The prompt for the supplemental essays is very important. Think about it, consider it, because they're asking that for a reason.
I think, and I know this is going to be a brief answer from both of you, but I feel like so many families and students will expend so much energy and focus and time on that main Common App essay, and they overlook the absolute importance and emphasis on the school specific supplement essays. And I'm curious if either or both of you want to just touch on why this is why or how this has become so misrepresented, that supplement essays, which, candidly, optically look less important because they're sometimes shorter, even sometimes as short as 100, 150 words. Why why do people think this, and why should they absolutely not be discounted, and in some cases be more?
This is what the school cares about. As Kevin said earlier, they are telegraphing their institutional priorities. If they're asking you about your academic interest, you should care about your academic interest. You should be really thoughtful about this because this is something they are explicitly wanting to know. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of colleges that just take the common application and they have enough information to make a decision. But those supplements mean that we need more from you. So we need you to put just as much effort into your personal statement and those written components as you do your supplements. I will say that I leaned really heavily on supplemental essays in my career when I was working at the three schools that had the three supplemental essays as they did. Because again, that spoke directly to the institution. And we know that you're applying to a lot of different universities and you have a lot of options in front of you. So why are you taking the time to fill out our application and put your foot forward for us? So again, it's just as important to do as well, because again, the university is saying, hey, we care about this. Please answer something related to this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Relatedly, when I was at UC Berkeley, we're recruiting students for graduate programs, technical fields. It's hard to gauge if you put something on your resume, I can do this coding language, like what is your proficiency? You in an essay form, I can actually like see, like, did you actually like build out a full thing, right? Did you build out a full system? Did you implement it across multiple jobs, right? So that we can get the insight for the institutional priority, which was like technical competency in that case. I guess the other thing I'll mention is I think the reason why people underestimate the supplements versus the Common App stuff is two reasons. One, like every student does the Common App personal statement, so like it's everybody's talking about it for that reason. Like not everybody does a supplemental essay to the Penn State, Penn State Schreier, the honors program there, right? That's one reason. The other reason is, and this is where like underlining Eric's point, you need to give space here, and it's good to start early, is for a lot of seniors, especially ones who don't work with us, what this typically looks like is maybe I drafted something in the summer, maybe I drafted something in English class. Most of them, some do, right? And then like I'm spending so much time just getting my Common App stuff done. I only got like a few weeks then to do a bunch of supplemental essays. And they're all kind of very, very mediocre as a result, because I did a bunch of essays, even though they are shorter last minute, right? So a lot of less thought because there's just less time. But they are important as part of this process. So that's one of the reasons why we do start early. Let's get the Common App stuff done because it goes to all the schools. But like getting that done early means we can actually give space so you can actually think about your responses to some of these essays. Because while most of those prompts are very directive, not all the prompts are easy to answer. The University Florida Honors prompt is an example of one that might be a little bit more difficult. University of Chicago is notorious for how difficult their prompts are because they're very unique and designed to really get a distinct sense of your perspective and how you think in a very detailed way. So you really need to give supplemental essay space.
So to round up the night, and I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you again for this. I'd like to ask you directly here. What does our process look like in supporting students with essays? And, what makes, you know, what makes our work so effective and exceptional in supporting students throughout this process?
Our process really is comprehensive in that we start from the very beginning of whenever you work with us. We've said it so many times, but it really is a hallmark of how we work with students and that we really get to know them. We care about you and your students and your families and wanting to make sure that they get to wherever they want to go. So we have an extensive brainstorming process where we get to know them. We'll ask them we admitted sometimes weird questions, but follow-up questions for introspection so that we can again continue to get to know them. And then through conversations over Zoom, through conversations over Google Chat, or rather through Google Comments on Google Docs, we'll continue to get to know them and then eventually come up with an outline and an idea with them that makes the most sense for them. And then again, we keep asking those questions in the actual draft. So what? Why are you thinking this way? Tell me more about this experience and things like that, so that we can build this essay together, always within the student's writing, always in their authentic voice, and they are in the driver's seat here because again, their authentic voice is important, not just to us as coaches, but also to the admission officers, as we've heard throughout the entire process here. So we work from beginning to end. We're comprehensive. We're your coaches, your allies, and most importantly, your support systems from the very beginning of the process all the way through to the very end.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great answer. I don't have a ton to add to it because I think you covered it pretty thoroughly, Jordan. I guess the only other things I will mention, right, is in the process of getting to know your student, asking those questions. I kind of liken it to like a duck where it just looks, we're asking the questions, it looks calm on the surface, but the legs are turning a mile a minute underneath the surface of the water because we're thinking about multiple things. We do help students project manage their applications, right? So it's like, hey, are we making forward progress on this? Because there's a ton of moving components. Even if we don't use this interesting thing that we're talking about now, there might be an interesting supplement down the line that we know exactly what it's going to be good for. So we, as far as the end-to-end help, it is comprehensive, and we do try to part of the reason the process is getting to know you is not just for the essay, but also like, hey, what are your goals in this process? What's going to make your family, your student happy? We oftentimes say our success is your student's happiness. So we get to know that, so we can also project manage and have those little feet kicking under the water, so that we're moving towards that goal.
And I love, if I can add one more point, that this isn't like some tutoring session and there's not some like boundaries, in fact, whereas a lot of school counselors, are off during the summer, and don't lend any support, whether you're at public or private schools, we're working all throughout the summer, which is the ideal time for students to write their applications and essays. And, when we say we're really in the trenches with students and families, it's because they can feel free reaching out to us anytime. And it feels like a constant back and forth conversation where we're just in it. I always love saying, like, there's a reason that so many of our students call us before, all their closest friends and most of their relatives when they get into college. It's because the bond is that close. And I think that's another essential way we get to the stories that help distinguish them at the end of this journey. So, with that said, Jordan and Kevin, a huge thank you for all of your insights, especially from your, enormous amounts of experience that you bring to our team and the students we work with every single day. So, just a tremendous, tremendous thank you to you both. For everyone here who's listened, if you found this helpful, please forward this YouTube link on. We'll be posting it shortly. And, spread the word. We appreciate all of your referrals and support. It means everything to us because I know that we, pour our hearts and souls into students and their journeys and capturing and celebrating their stories as best as possible. So, a huge thank you to both of you again tonight and for everyone here live. And we look forward to talking with you all soon. Take care.